Congratulations, class of 2013. All right. I confess I haven't heard an introduction talk about our great work on recycling in San Francisco in years. It reminds me a little bit off topic by a factor of infinity, but it reminds me, you thought gay marriage was controversial in San Francisco. When I required composting in San Francisco, that was a real controversy. Garbage police coming out, tough stuff. So here's the good news, bad news. Good news is I do not have prepared remarks. The bad news is I do not have prepared remarks. And I know that Dr. Cedillo got me here, said you're going to have to keep this brief so that it is not a memorable speech. Because I am the guy that you're all going to forget in the next few years when you go back. Who the heck was that at our graduation that spoke? But indeed, I'm honored nonetheless to be here as someone with a circuitous connection to College of Marin. I technically graduated from College of Marin. And this is not a particularly good story, and it's not one that if you're representing me in my PR team, you want me to share. But it's the truth. So I went to this other university, Santa Clara, and the only way I got in there was a baseball scholarship. Let's just establish some foundational facts. A good Redwood High School graduate, just down the block. A few of you, I hope, know your audience. I know there's some Drake graduates here, but that's for, oh yeah. Exactly, we'll take that in the back. So I worked through, but I had a difficulty passing this one course a couple of times. And it got to a point where they had all but given up, but decided they needed to increase their percentages, so they let me graduate down at Santa Clara, but with the proviso that I went to College of Marin to pass that course. Back to good news, bad news. You were kind enough to offer that course, and I was, well, compelled, not necessarily good enough to take it, and I didn't pass it. Here's the dot I'm trying to connect. There's a reason I don't have a speech to read. Because it turns out all those years that I was struggling reading and writing, and for that matter, speaking, that I wasn't familiar with the fact that I had something called dyslexia. And exactly, that's a great damn thing, isn't it? It's good to have a learning disability. And because it sure as heck helped me. So I went back to Santa Clara and I said, well, apparently my mom told me she didn't really want me to use this as a crutch. She said, you've got this thing called dyslexia. Maybe that will help. And so I went back and they said, well, why the heck didn't you tell us this? You would never have had to take the course in the first place. Thus, I am a proud graduate of, well, I presumably am a proud graduate of both College of Marin and Santa Clara University. So it's good to be home, class of 2013. All right, here's what I told Valerie and Scott, I said, I'm going to listen to what you have to say because you're going to inspire me about what I want to say. And I listened to Scott talk about his children, and I have 2 kids, and I appreciate, Scott, you reminding us what it's all about, family, and it's about that generational connection. And I listened to what Valerie said when she talked in the opening of her comments about diversity. And I want to connect some dots and, again, not take too much of your time, but hopefully leave something in what I'm about to say that's meaningful to somebody. You know, all the attention this week around Guantanamo Bay and the president's speech yesterday on terrorism, the challenge and struggles with drones and the great tragedy in England and a soldier that was killed in an act of terror, and of course what happened in Boston, has brought to fore something you already know, and that is all over the world, nations and people literally are being torn apart because of racial and religious and ethnic controversy that's fueling fanaticism and fueling terror. But I say this, or say that to say this. Valerie reminded me of an incredibly important point. Here we are in California, the most diverse state in the world's most diverse democracy. And I have long believed, and I hope you believe this, I have long believed that the world looks to us to see that it's possible to live together, even in darkness, to advance together, and to prosper together across every conceivable and imaginable difference. That at our best, as a community, as a graduating class, look around. We're not just tolerating our diversity, we're celebrating our diversity. We're celebrating all our interesting and unique differences, but we're uniting around our common humanity, that web of mutuality that Dr. King talks so eloquently about. So the point of saying that is not just to celebrate that principle that I think defines the best of our state in terms of our capacity to live together across those differences, but to make a case about the world that we're living in and the world you're entering into. A world that's no longer connected, as Tom Friedman said in 2005 in his seminal book called The World is Flat, but a world that's now hyper-connected. I had the chance to interview Tom Friedman a few months ago, and Tom just came out with a new book called That Used to Be Us. And I asked him, I said, what world are we living in, Tom? You pose that question rhetorically all the time, so let me ask you this. What world are we living in? What are the trend lines that define this world? And he said, let me explain it this way. You remember my book, The World is Flat? I said, I do. He said, it was a New York Times bestseller. I said, I'm aware of that. He says it was on the New York Times bestseller list in 2005, not that long ago. He says, a book about globalization and technology. He goes, look in the index, look under F, F-A. In 2005, he said, Facebook is not even in there. He said in 2005, Twitter was a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking space. LinkedIn, a prison. Big data was a rapper. Apps were things you filled out to get into the College of Marin. And Skype, for most of us, was a typo. Think about it. Those things did not exist, and they're ubiquitous in our lives today in just 2005. No longer connected, but a hyper-connected world. The rate and change unimaginable just a few years ago. That's the world you're entering into. A world where many are coming to reconcile the fact that the industrial economy is running out of gas. It's running out of steam. Institutions that have served us well for centuries now no longer have the relevance they once had. You think about what's happened in the media industry, in newspapers, with bloggers. It's happened to your local newspaper. Think about what's happened in the music industry. It wasn't that long ago, wasn't it? That we were all buying albums. Now we're buying individual songs because Steve Jobs decided that Sean Parker at Napster and those crazy folks at Metallica may have been onto something and made a deal with the music industry and created that platform that allows us to download those songs. You're seeing the same contours of change in the financial services industry. I have an uncle. You may have an uncle like this as well. You may be that uncle. Talks about the good old days. He's out at the bar, probably at 2 or 3 in the afternoon on his second or third martini. Talking about the good old days in the stock brokerage business, where everyone had to come through him, regardless of the commissions. And then Chuck Schwab came along and E-Trade came along. Technology radically changed that business. The contours of this change are being felt everywhere. It's not cyclical. It's a punctuation point in history, and you're living through this. No longer connected, but a hyper-connected world. Weren't we all reminded of that in 2008 during that mybarackobama.com campaign? Remember that campaign? 35,000 self-organizing communities coming together across every conceivable difference. Remember, change starts from the bottom up. And the president, to his credit, President-elect Barack Obama said, I want to continue the conversation after Election Day because he recognized one-way conversations are dead. It's all about two-way conversations. And he continued that conversation, and you may recall this vaguely, with a big town hall meeting. And he entitled the whole frame and platform, Change.gov. If you were allowed to keep those cell phones on, you can skip ahead and check this out. Google what happened to Change.gov. In fact, on the homepage of Change.gov, it says, let's continue the conversation. We don't want to change the players. We want to change the game. And he said, what's on your mind? 2008, is it the war in Iraq? Is it the war in Afghanistan? Is it the war on terror? Is it the financial meltdown? Or is it climate change? Tell me what you think. Let's have this unprecedented two-way conversation, this virtual and physical town hall during the transition, to mark not just the next 100 days, not just in one term, but 2 terms, no, the next 100 years of our great democracy. And people came together in record numbers. Some of you may have even participated. Those self-organizing communities participating. And they did exactly what Michelle Obama did not but a few months ago, the Academy Awards. In this case, the president-elect opened up the envelope. And what was on your mind? What was the number one priority? Was it that war in Afghanistan, withdrawing our troops, or the war on terror? Was it the issue of climate change? No, the number one issue on your mind during this incredibly important point was legalize marijuana. True story. Some of you were ecstatic. By the way, the president responded almost exactly as you just responded. And the online community didn't think it was so funny because they were quite sincere and serious. So what did the president do? I'm not here to criticize him. He did what a lot of us would do. He turned off the site for reconstruction. Look it up. Change.gov doesn't exist anymore. It was just transitioned into whitehouse.gov. The old website. The bottom-up campaigner became a top-down president. Yes, we can became yes, he can. It's not an indictment, again, of the president. To his credit, he at least asserted a recognition of this. And it got me thinking of the whole issue of leadership. And these are the 2 quick dots I want to connect and end. Because at the end of the day, we're desperate for leadership. Authority does not mean leadership. Think about this. You think about what technology is doing. It's making big things small and small things big. Large, hierarchical, centralized institutions are literally being crushed by self-organizing multi-stakeholders, decentralizing and connecting. Think of what happened with the Facebook youth, the Tahrir Square, the Indignados in Spain, the Weibo microbloggers in China, what's happening with the big populist movements, Tea Party, what's left of the Occupy movement. Populism is out there. And you think about that to make this case, this whole idea, and I hope you think about this, of the guy or gal on the white horse to come save the day, if it ever existed, I'm not convinced at all it does exist in the world you're about to enter into. This notion of formal authority, that you have to be something to do something. And I realize that at the end of the day, the constraints of actually governing from a position of authority are remarkably limiting. Contrast that to Dr. Martin Luther King, Václav Havel, Gandhi, Mandela. Think about where they were. Think about Gandhi in 1935. Think about King in 1959 or Mandela in 1985, Havel in 1988. At the peak of their influence during those years, what did they all have in common? At the peak of their influence. One thing, jail time. Just an interesting fact. They changed their countries and the world, but they shared one other thing in common. None of them, at the peak of their influence, had formal authority. They weren't elected to those positions, but they exercised their moral authority, which every single one of you have the capacity at any single moment to exercise. Mandela served only 1 term and struggled governing when he exercised formal authority. Václav Havel, the philosopher president who wrote The Power of the Powerless, talked eloquently and wrote eloquently for years of his struggle to actually govern once he was elected. Every single one of you have the capacity to lead. And with these tools of technology to connect like-minded people in a way none of those exceptional leaders had as a capacity. So please, as you enter into whatever it is you're doing next, this world desperately needs people to step up and step in with authenticity to lead. Next point. I've been thinking about the secret of success. And what that big idea is all about. And I'm reminded of a great story. You may, just this very brief, you may recall this. In 2004, in the fall of 2004 in Death Valley, hottest place in the United States, doesn't ever rain. Something remarkable happened in 2004. 6 inches of rain fell in Death Valley. What was even more remarkable is in the spring of 2005, the entire Death Valley was blanketed, carpeted with beautiful wildflowers. People had never seen this. 100+ years. Had never seen anything like this. Turns out Death Valley wasn't dead. It was dormant. It was waiting for the right conditions to come along. That the seeds of possibility were always there, waiting for the right conditions to come along. And when the right conditions do come along, success is inevitable. It happens. To wit my point. Your capacity to do extraordinary things, when you think, well, I'm just not that special, I'm not that capable, I'm not that gifted, I'm not that endowed, I'm not that smart, I'm not that curious, I'm just not that person, I'm not a leader. My argument to you is what lies dormant inside of you. And the only way to discover it is to fail more often. The secret of all success, Winston Churchill said this. You may even want to write this down. It's Winston Churchill, after all. Said the secret of all success is moving from failure to failure with enthusiasm. Pretty nice. I'm going to close with 2 quick points on this. I believe in that principle so much. I have a small business. I got about 1,000 employees, about 17 small businesses. I say that not to impress you, but impress upon you this point. I believed in that so much that I decided to create a failure award in my business. I actually reward the biggest screw up every single month. I'm not kidding. We give a big bonus to the person that screws up the most. You should come work for me. I got a little hotel, very quick, and I know my time's up. I got a small little hotel up in Lake Tahoe. It was built in 1959 for the Winter Olympics. The delegates were going to stay there. It was supposed to be torn down after the '60 Olympics. It's still around, holding together, duct tape and all. We don't have an air conditioning system. So what we have to do during the summers up in Lake Tahoe is we got to keep a lot of the windows open and the doors to the hallways open. Now, for years and years, I had this wonderful guy named Ludo, who was my engineer. He had never once called me. He called me down in San Francisco in a panic. He says, I don't know what the heck this is. And I'm like, Ludo, what, just calm down. 6:30 in the morning. Like, Ludo, what's it? He said, I just got here. I said, what? He said, well, this is the damnedest thing. There are fish tails. There are bones everywhere. There's eyes. I don't know if we've been vandalized, something's been broken in. I don't know. I'm like, Ludo, just figure this thing out. He goes, I'm going to figure it out. I said, thank you. Get back to me. And he hangs up, and I'm sitting there going, what the heck is going on? 30 minutes later, he goes, I figured it out. He says, you know that guy, Scotty? I said, what, our night clerk? He goes, yeah, the night clerk. You know, those guys that come in at 11 o'clock at night and you're dinging the thing to wake this guy up at 2, 3 in the morning. Well, it turns out he was so frustrated with the complaints about all the mosquitoes during those hot summer months that he decided on his own to go out and buy some catfish and put them in the little ponds that are all around our hotel, figuring smartly that's where the larva is of the mosquitoes. So he put these catfish in there, just did it on his own, and called it a day, left at 5 in the morning, end of his shift, took off. And it turns out, Ludo tells me, Scotty did this, and he needs to be fired. I said, what are you talking about? Well, he goes, well, remember I mentioned all the fish parts everywhere. Well, here's what happened. He said, turns out this idiot put those things in the ponds, and the raccoons went after the fish. And this feast, like the last, nothing they've ever imagined. all these fish captured in one place. They were so delirious, so exceptionally enthusiastic, they started running down the halls of the hotel in delirium with body parts of these fish being thrown and all over the place. You need to fire him. And I said immediately, we need to give him a bonus. And my failure award was literally born with that experience. Secret of all success is moving from failure to failure with enthusiasm. Don't make the mistakes again, however, class of 2013. Here's my final point. I had this guy, Michael Pritchard. He's an old friend of mine. He told me this just the other day. He's a huge supporter of the Special Olympics. And this connects the opening dot, if that fact we're all in this together. He was talking about this very quick story about this race. And there was 5 folks assembled, 1 lap race. And this, clearly one woman in this race had an advantage. Her name was Judy. And she takes off. And she's halfway done before the other girls are even a quarter way done. And she's running along and people are excited, jumping up and down saying, well, keep going, Judy. You got it. The gold medal. You got the gold medal. You got it. Keep running. Keep going. Keep going. And then she slowed down and then she stopped. And people are like, well, you're almost there. You're 3/4 of the way done. You're so far ahead of everyone else. She said, no, I got this. They said, come on, no, hurry up, Judy, please come. Run. You're almost there. You got it. She goes, nope. And she stood there and she waited for all the other runners to make their way. And she did something remarkable that is an example of leadership and a reminder to all of us what life is all about. She puts out both arms and she puts everyone hand to hand and she walks with all of the folks together across the finish line. An example of humility, an example of leadership. And it's just a reminder of this, that the world is too small, our wisdom is too limited, our time on this earth is too short to win fleeting victories at other people's expense. Class of 2013, it's time for all of us to triumph together. Congratulations.